So I am pleased at this point to introduce Dan Schulman, author of Sons of Witchita. Dan's extensive experience as a journalist is reflected in the depth and details found in Sons of Witchita. During his career, he has written on a range of topics, including bioterrorism, information warfare, private military contractors, corporate espionage, federal whistleblowers, and money in politics. He's a senior editor in the Washington, D.C. Bureau of Mother Jones and a founding member of the magazine's investigative journalism team. His work has appeared in the Boston Globe magazine, the Village Voice, Psychology Today, and many other publications. Dan grew up in New York's Hudson River Valley. He's a graduate of Emerson College and Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, where he was the assistant editor on the Review. And he splits his time, as we were talking about, between here and Cambridge. This is his first book, and we're very fortunate to have him today because he's soon to become a first-time dad, and so the timing was just right. Please welcome Dan Schulman.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to the club for having me here today. It's a real honor to be with you. I thought I'd give you guys a little bit of a picture of the political evolution of the Koch family, and then, of course, we'll open it up to questions, and you can grill me as much or as little as you want. It often seems as if the Koch brothers just exploded onto the political scene following the election of Barack Obama in 2008. But really, their political rise was many, many decades in the making. So I'll take you back sort of on the journey I went through as I began researching this project. I really found that to understand Charles and David Koch, their beliefs, their politics, the place that they're coming from ideologically, it required me to understand their father. Fred Koch is the Koch family patriarch. He grew up in the panhandle of Texas. His dad was a newspaper man, and in fact, a Democrat. It was a bit of a hard-scrabble upbringing for Fred Koch. He ends up going to MIT and majoring in chemical engineering. After college, he sort of bounces around the United States, working for a number of oil refineries. Goes to England and helps to build a refinery there. And in the mid-1920s, he forms an oil engineering partnership in Wichita, Kansas, which is eventually called Winkler Koch Engineering Company. Now, this is at a period in America's history when cars are first becoming prevalent on the road. There's a huge national thirst for gasoline. Fred Koch and his partner develop a process for refining oil that basically ekes more gas out of each barrel of oil. It's a very valuable process, and they begin selling this process throughout the Midwest, where there's a lot of upstart oil refineries. Now, unfortunately for Fred Koch, this process is very, very similar to one that is then in use by a company called Universal Oil Products, which is basically composed of the major oil companies of that day, the remnants of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil empire. They don't take too kindly to young Fred Koch peddling this process throughout the Midwest, and in one case, poaching one of their customers. So what takes place is Universal Oil Products ends up suing Fred Koch relentlessly, as well as his customers. It gets to the point where Fred can no longer do business in the United States, and he has to look abroad for new clients. And this is really where his political awakening begins. His first customer ends up being Stalin's Soviet Union. This is at a time when the Russian Revolution has just occurred. The Russian oil industry has been decimated by revolution. The Soviets are scouring the globe for modern oil refining technology in order to power their industrialization. America didn't have diplomatic relations with the Soviets at that time, and there were a lot of American and European firms that in fact, rebuffed the Soviets when they were trying to get this technology. They didn't want to provide this to them because, of course, the Bolsheviks were saying at that point that they were planning a worldwide revolution. Fred and his partner were desperate for business at that time, and they got over whatever misgivings they might have had about doing business with the Soviets and entered into a $5 million deal to modernize the Soviet oil industry by upgrading 15 refineries and training dozens of Russian oil engineers. In doing so, they would really put the Soviet Union on the path to becoming the superpower that it would eventually become. Fred Koch spends 3 months in the Soviet Union in 1930, overseeing the construction of these refineries, and he's horrified by what he sees. He later writes that Russia is a land of hunger, misery, and terror. He returns home vowing to do everything he can to stop the spread of communism. In the ensuing years, he becomes a very outspoken anti-communist. And in 1958, he is among a select group of American businessmen who are summoned to Indianapolis by a former Candy executive by the name of Robert Welch, who also was known for his anti-communist views at that point. And they were brought there under the strictest secrecy. They didn't even know why they were going to Indianapolis. And they were told not to even stay at the same hotel, lest they attract suspicion about why all these prominent businessmen are in one place. This ends up being the founding meeting of the John Birch Society, and Fred Koch is literally in the room at the birth of this organization and goes on to play a very prominent role within it. He becomes a national council member, and Wichita, Kansas becomes a real hotbed. Wichita, Kansas, which is where the Koch family lives, becomes a real hotbed of Birch Society organizing. I was speaking with Eugene earlier, who mentioned that as a school teacher in Texas, the Birch Society really targeted her for some of the things that were said in her classroom at that time. And that really brought back a lot of memories for me about researching this book, and especially what was taking place in Wichita at this time. There were many stories about students allegedly being told to spy on their teachers for any hint of subversion. I remember as I was doing the book, I talked to one former Wichita school teacher who recalled that she had handed out those UNICEF collection boxes to the students for Halloween. And this became a huge source of controversy because, of course, the Birch Society was completely against the United Nations, and there was, their motto at that time was US out now, in reference to the United Nations. So Charles Koch, who is the second of four of the Koch brothers, returns home he attends MIT as well. He returns home and joins the Birch Society, largely because his dad is an influential member. But he really seems to take to it. He founds a John Birch Society bookstore down the street from the Koch family home, where he curates a section on Austrian economics, free market economics. And to give you an idea of how diehard the Kochs were about communism were at that point, I heard one story as I was putting together my book from a Koch family friend who recalls strolling up to the Koch family home sometime in the mid-1960s. He's carrying a copy of Ernest Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises. And he knocks on the door. Charles Koch answers, and his eyes flicker over the cover of this book, and the visitor can tell that there's something wrong. And finally he asks, okay, what is it? And Charles responds very politely, well, Hemingway was a communist, and his literature is not allowed inside our home. So this visitor actually has to leave, this copy of Hemingway on the stoop in order to enter. That's how serious they were about communism at that point.